spare video kill. Harry then explains that every kill was recorded on video. The Apaches saw it all. When they'd return to camp, they would take the video and place it into a machine which would project the kill onto a wall-mounted plasma, and a squadron commander would scrutinize it. And Harry explains that the squadron commander was doing this to try and find that they'd made a mistake. And he felt that this individual was trying to provoke the men, and he concluded that this was being done out of jealousy, although I think he would rather he actually means envy. Apparently, the squadron commander had never pulled a trigger in battle, and he never attacked the enemy, so instead he attacked the men. Now, whether this is accurate or whether this is paranoia on Harry's part, you can make your own mind up about that. He hadn't found anything, the squadron commander hadn't found anything irregular in any of the kills. And what was annoying, apparently, was that he was exploiting a fear. Afghanistan was a war of mistakes with collateral damage, with thousands of innocents killed and maimed, and that always haunted the soldiers. And therefore, he explained that his goal was to always ensure that he went to bed, never doubting that he'd killed Taliban, and only Taliban. Harry wanted to return to Britain intact, but also with his conscience intact. Harry then explains that most soldiers can't tell you how much death is on their ledger, because there's often a lot of indiscriminate firing. But in the age of Apaches and laptops, everything that he did was recorded, time-stamped, so he was always in a position to explain what he'd done and how many enemy combatants that he'd actually killed. And this is when he's able to recount his number of 25. And he explains, it wasn't a number that gave me any satisfaction, but neither was it a number that made me feel ashamed. Naturally, I'd have preferred not to have that number on my military CV, on my mind, but by the same token, I'd have preferred to live in a world in which there was no Taliban, a world without war. Even for an occasional practitioner of magical thinking like me, however, some realities just can't be changed. He then, of course, explains that he didn't think of them as actually people. He talked about them as being the chess pieces, the controversial comments, which, of course, have got him into some hot water, both in terms of talking about the number of kills and the attitude. I have, of course, addressed this in parts passing when this was dealt with in the press. He then talks about remembering seeing what had happened with the Twin Towers, and he felt that he was avenging one of the most heinous crimes in history and looking to prevent that type of thing happening again. He then explains that his tour was nearing its end at Christmas 2012 and that he had have questions about the war, but none of them were moral. He believed in the mission. And he explained one time they were called in to help out some Gurkhas, and it haunted him in instances where they were unable to do something, and he could hear they weren't able to help because of a breakdown in communications. So he organised his bags and had certain regrets, but they were of the healthy kind, and it was more a case of the regrets for the things that he hadn't done rather than the things that he had done. And he explained most of all he regretted that he had to leave. So it was now into 2013, and he had an obligatory exit interview with one reporter who asked him if he'd fired on the enemy, and the reporter seemed surprised, which irritated Harry because he thought to himself, what do you think we're doing over here, selling magazine subscriptions? He was then asked if he'd killed anyone, and Harry explained that he had. And again, the reporter appeared surprised, and Harry was irritated by this because, after all, it was a war. He was then asked about his brother and sister-in-law, with Catherine just announced that she was pregnant, and he said they deserved to have their baby in peace. Harry admits that his father had begged him not to keep thinking about the press and to not read the papers, but he carried on doing so. And it's interesting that he admits to doing this. I regularly explain to those who are seeking to move on from an involvement with a narcissist that you have to abide by the principle of GOSO. Get out and stay out. Once you know, you go. And emotional thinking tries to keep people tied in. Keeps you tied into some form of interaction with the narcissist, whether it's keeping an eye on what the narcissist is doing in their new relationship, whether it's arguing with the narcissist about what's gone on in the past, musing over what has occurred, looking at the narcissist posts on Instagram, etc. And I regularly explain to people that if you stay out of those 5 arenas, you'll move forward far quicker, reducing your emotional thinking, reducing the risk of adverse consequences, not giving the narcissist fuel, etc. But there is that important aspect of taking responsibility for your own actions, of basically staying away from looking at what the narcissist is doing. Because continuing to do that and talk about it and think about it only makes life worse for you. And it's the same principles that are applicable to Prince Harry. If he avoided reading what the press was saying, he wouldn't get as worked up about it. He doesn't like them. He doesn't have any need to know what's being written about him. It's a compulsion that he gives into, and all it does is actually get him irritated, angry, and frustrated. Therefore, stop doing it. And exercising that self-control by staying away from a thing that's problematic to you is hugely important and a lesson worth learning. Of course, the problem was that he would look, and he admits that it annoyed him that people would believe what was in there on the basis of where there's smoke, there must be fire. And then we get a chapter, or I beg your pardon, we get a paragraph which is clearly come from Harry's wife. Even if a falsehood was disproved, debunked beyond all doubt, the residue of initial belief remained, especially if the falsehood was negative. Of all human biases, negativity bias is the most indelible. It's baked into our brains. Privilege the negative, prioritize the negative, that's how our ancestors survived. That's what the bloody papers count on, I wanted to say. Those are not the observations of Harry. Those are the observations that have been generated by Harry's wife and have found their way into the narrative of his autobiography. He explains that he had complicated emotions about saying goodbye to Afghanistan, and he went off to Cyprus for what the army called decompression. He hadn't had any on the last tour, so he's looking forward to that. He explained that everybody was issued 2 cans of beer, but apparently Harry didn't like beer. Well, that's a revelation. I wasn't aware about that. I thought he loved chugging the ales. So what does he ordinarily drink? Vodka? Well, anyway. So he explained that he went to a comedy show, and he explained that some people laughed but many didn't because they were struggling. They had memories to process, mental wounds to heal, existential questions to sort. And he explained they could have just sat there in a form of suspended animation, and he felt bad for the comedians because it was a tough gig. Then he was told that he was all over the papers and he'd forgotten about the interview that he'd given, and of course it had caused a stir by him admitting that he killed people in a war. And he faced similar criticism to he has done recently by being blithe about it because he compared killing to a video game. In the next chapter, we learn out more about what happens when he gets in touch with Cress again, as he calls her. Join me there.